initiative, and I'm joined here by a couple of those fellows who will introduce themselves in just a moment. But I'll start by explaining some of the work that Schoolhouse Connection does and who we are as an organization. Schoolhouse Connection is a national nonprofit dedicated to addressing youth homelessness through education. We work with educators from early childhood through higher education, service providers, families, and youth with lived experience in homelessness, as well as elected officials to come up with solutions to address the barriers that youth experiencing homelessness face. Schoolhouse Connection has a wealth of resources on our website, so I invite you all to visit us at schoolhouseconnection.org, where you'll find a wealth of information regarding federal and state policy advocacy, Q&As in our inbox, which is a collection of information and resources that are shared amongst professionals who work in the youth homelessness space. We have an archived section of webinars that provide greater information as well as training resources for people who are interested in trying to find ways that they can better do their jobs serving youth experiencing homelessness. And also information on our youth leadership and scholarship program, which is an initiative through which we provide scholarship money to youth experiencing homelessness and support them into college and helping them navigate their way through as well. So our Policy Fellows program is an initiative that we started a couple of years ago. The aim of the program is to connect and mobilize a network of allies and advocates across a variety of states who can respond to calls to action around legislative advocacy, both at the federal and the state levels. Our Policy Fellows are a really talented group of professionals who work in education and community service, who engage elected officials around a set of priorities that we're working on to change policy. We are on our second cohort now, and this year's cohort has visited Congress members from 7 states. The fellows group numbers about 14, I believe, and they have engaged in legislative visits around 3 priorities, which we'll talk about a bit later. But these efforts have supported the introduction of important federal legislation that so far gained 15 co-sponsors, and we're working on the introduction of another key piece of legislation, excuse me. And with that, I will turn it over to one of those fellows, Courtney Rouse. You're muted. There you go.
Sorry, y'all. My name is Courtney Rouse. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator with One Roof. Just a little bit about One Roof. For those who don't know, we are a HUD homeless continuum, and we serve Central Alabama, and those are Jefferson, Shelby, and St. Clair counties. We have about 4 different populations that we service as far as like demographics. 2 of those being families with children and youth age people who are 18 to 24.
Thank you, Courtney. Renata, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Yes, sir. My name is Dr. Renata Hollins. I am the Homeless Liaison and Director for the Lowndes County Public School System. Lowndes County is mostly in the west part of Alabama. Our population is now 90% African American, 9% Hispanic, and 1% Caucasian. Right now, Lowndes County has over 210 homeless youth.
Thank you. Now, Courtney's going to explain what we're going to do this afternoon. You're muted again.
Sorry. So we are going to introduce you all to student homelessness, what we are advocating for, and the things you can do to advocate for maybe students that you service, other or families that have youth involved in the family unit.
All right, and I want you all to know that in addition to this session being recorded, we are also encouraging you to use the Q&A feature to submit questions you might have, or if you have challenges doing that, feel free to drop them in the chat. You will get a copy of the presentation along with the questions and answers that'll be provided during the webinar today. And that'll come in a follow-up email that you should get by tomorrow. You should also feel free, if you want to introduce yourself to other folks in the chat by including your name, title, and organization. All right, Courtney.
Okay. So between the years 2021 and 2022, we've had the Department of Education has identified 1.2 million students who are experiencing homelessness. Many schools have reported that there are challenges identifying, communicating with students experiencing homelessness. In a few slides, we're going to explain some of the reason why there are barriers to identifying those students, and talk about what can be done to help reduce those barriers as well. From when I first introduced myself, I did tell you all that I am a part of a HUD homeless continuum. It has been, a different experience working with SchoolHouse Connection, because we are on the other end of homelessness. We're what you would think literal homelessness, meaning outside and shelters, but there are different definitions of homelessness. We have different federal agencies right now that define homelessness in different ways. And here are just a few of those ways. Families that are staying in motels, whether that is paid for by the parents or the single parent, or by churches, charities, or government funded agencies. Staying with other people after an eviction. Usually when people go through that eviction process, it is very hard to get into stable housing because, there's things that pop up on your credit report. Moving into a new place oftentimes is expensive. If you didn't have the money to pay the rent, oftentimes you won't have the money to also go right into a new place. Staying at a domestic violence shelter and any other type of emergency shelter. So for those who are familiar with Central Alabama, that would be like our First Lights, our Salvation Armies, firehouse shelters like that. And then there's another, we find this very common amongst our youth population, which is rotating housing, or couch surfing as we call it. And so that, is a form of instably housed. You don't have permanent housing. And so it is a form of homelessness based on the Department of Education's definition, and also living doubled up. And this is very different from multi-generational living, but this is more so families who don't have a choice on their living arrangements. It's either this or outside. So these are just some of the many different definitions of homelessness. We are working to kind of bridge those gaps between the definitions to offer more support to families. In Alabama, between 2020 and 2021, we had over 9,365 youth experiencing homelessness. 3.4% of those were unsheltered, meaning outside, cars, abandoned buildings, and it probably more than likely includes families living in homes that don't have utilities as well. Shelters would be 5.2%, so that's just slightly higher. Hotels would be 8.2%. That would include hotels paid for by charities, churches, and or if people are doing a lot of gig work to kind of, paying per night. And the largest percentage would be those who are doubled up. So those are staying maybe with family that they probably shouldn't be staying with, being over occupancy level for certain like apartments and homes. And so based on FAFSA data, and this would only include 11th and 12th grade students, 477 students experience homelessness in an unaccompanied way. So that's without an adult.
Sorry, I'm going to speak on the impact of homelessness on education. 42% of students who experience homelessness say they dropped out of school at least once. 60% of the students say the reason why they dropped out because it was hard to stay in school while they were homeless. Homelessness is associated with 87% likelihood of dropping out of school, chronic absenteeism, and disproportionate school discipline. Over time, the achievement gaps between homeless and low-income elementary students tend to persist and even may become worse. Overcoming homelessness through education. Lack of a high school diploma or GED is the single greatest risk factor for young adults' homelessness. 346% more likely. More than 2/3 of jobs require some form of post-secondary education. What that means is a lot of jobs, you have to at least get some job training skills, attend a junior college, or job training skills. The McKinney-Vento Act is an important strategy to overcome homelessness because that is even more important during the pandemic. Okay.
Do you want to address some of the issues that McKinney-Vento?
Okay. The McKinney-Vento Act removes barriers through keeping the students in their school of origin. What that means is, let's say a child attends Calhoun High School in my county, but however, the family becomes homeless. So the McKinney-Vento Act allows the student to stay at Calhoun, and we will provide buses to get them to and from school every day. And that's what it means by providing students with transportation. Providing immediate enrollment. You cannot deny a child that's homeless from enrolling into school. Like, they can come to you, they don't have the birth certificate, they don't have a bill for their address. You can't deny that child enrollment. Assisting students through graduation and beyond. The McKinney-Vento, we can purchase the graduation cap and gown. We can pay for like educational field trips. Anything that's educational, McKinney-Vento can provide. However, we cannot provide food for those students.
And through McKinney-Vento, you help students with some of the educational challenges they face as well. Can you speak to that?
Okay. With McKinney-Vento, we can provide before school tutoring or after school tutoring and summertime tutoring. They don't have to pay for anything, and we provide a meal, and we provide transportation to and from school. If they need to come to school early, we'll provide transportation. For the summertime, we provide transportation for that as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, definition of homelessness, just like my counterpart Courtney was talking about. McKinney-Vento says if they're sharing the house of others due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or a similar reason. If they lost their house due to a storm, a fire, or their home is unlivable and they have to move in with someone else, then they're considered homelessness. Living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, or camping grounds due to lack of alternate adequate accommodations. 83.70% of the students who share housing was served by McKinney-Vento in 2021. 8.2 of those students who was identified was served by McKinney-Vento in 20 and 21 that was living in motels, hotels, and trailer parks. Okay. Living in emergency or transitional shelters. Just like as Courtney stated before, domestic violence. That's where you have to get up and go in the middle of the night and you have to live somewhere else. That is an emergency situation. 5.2% of the students in Alabama are served through McKinney-Vento in 20 and 21. Living in a public or private place not designed for regular use accommodations. That's just like back when Hurricane Katrina came. And it really didn't tear up a lot of Alabama, but it tore up enough. So a lot of those people had to live like in stadiums and different churches and stuff like that. Living in cars, parks, abandoned buildings, or substandard housing, bus or train stations, or similar settings. And all of this information came from the U.S. Department of Education Guidance 2018.
Thank you. And I'll pause for just a moment to take any questions that you all may have. I don't see any in the Q&A or the chat, but feel free to let us know. And if not, we will continue talking about some of the work that we've done at the federal level, and we'll also take questions again after we're done with those slides. All right, seeing none. So I mentioned the federal work that our policy fellows has helped SchoolHouse Connection with. We have three main priorities that we have been advocating for with Congress members. One is to provide more funding and the flexibility that educators need to use those funds in ways that will allow them to help the youth in their communities with those needs that are more prominent where they live. We are also trying to address some of the barriers to higher education for both homeless and foster youth. And we are trying to address more of the needs of children, family, and youth through the Homeless Children and Youth Act, which you'll hear about in just a moment. Our fellows have done a great job at engaging both their U.S. reps and their U.S. senators. They've actually scheduled meetings with the staff members of the Congress folks in their respective districts and done a great job of talking about their experiences dealing with youth and making the case based on the personal experiences that they have and the experiences that the children and the families they serve have, and how these changes in law are really going to knock down some of the barriers that these youth have to addressing their homelessness. And I'll turn it over to Courtney to talk about that first priority.
The first priority is to provide flexible funding for students experiencing homelessness. So during COVID, there was an increase in flexible funding for the EHCY, which is the Education of Homeless Children and Youth. But that funding is about to expire if it hasn't already done so. And what this funding would do with like students that like Renata services would allow them to have the ability to address other needs that are contributing to homelessness that may not be, they may not have the funds for now. So that would be things like car repairs, utility bills. Sometimes people get caught up in the cycles of homelessness because there's not flexible funding, especially when you deal with agencies like HUD. You have to use it for very strict or restricted things. It may be for something like I would say very strict categories. And when you can't have that flexible funding, people that fall in that gray area of what they need that would resolve their homelessness, they slip through the cracks and they continue to go through a cycle. So that flexible funding would be very beneficial to homeless children and youth and their families. I think that in Birmingham, we've had like a pilot program for like giving families like funding that doesn't have any restrictions on it. It's about $300 a month. And I think they've recently released some data with that and how it's improved like the outcome of some of these low income families. And so we are at One Roof are working towards solutions for flexible funding to reduce the barriers of like previous evictions, car and tire repairs, moving funds, those things that would help a lot of the families that come in here with school-age children.
Thank you, Courtney. And I'll just add, so the American Rescue Plan included $800 million for homeless children and youth. And that funding, as Courtney mentioned, is going to be expiring. So it's really important to advocate for increased funding because she provided a lot of great examples of how that money is really impacting youth in ways that address the community-related needs. And that's the flexibility we're talking about. And so we really want to see our Congress members step up and make sure that that funding stream continues. I'll also add that we have been collecting examples similar to the ones that Courtney raised of how educators are using these ARP-HCY funds creatively on our website. So if you want to learn more about what people are doing in school districts across the country, I invite you to visit schoolhouseconnection.org.
The next is removing barriers for homeless and foster youth in higher education. This is a reintroduction into the bipartisan higher education access and success for homelessness and foster youth. This would require that there's a designated higher education liaison, much like there is for like elementary and high schools. So this would be for college age students or children phasing and trying to go into college. It will require that federally there is a plan for housing in between semesters. We do at One Roof get a lot of students who are housed the school year, but when they go into summer break or winter break, they're having to try to access friends, and most of the times if they don't have anywhere to go, they often don't have family here. A lot of the students are from overseas and they don't have any support here. So putting this into motion would make sure that all students are giving an opportunity to be housed in those off seasons. And it would also provide homeless and foster youth in-state tuition. And there are some other provisions that are also being provided, but those are some of the main ones. There are some campuses that offer something like this, but it's not cross states. No. It may be based on the university. So we're working on advocating for this to be something that is applied federally.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And Renata's going to talk about the third priority.
Okay. Meeting the needs of homeless youth and families, HR 5221 of 2003. Require the designation of dedicated hire. No, that's not what I'm supposed to be reading. Align federal definition of homelessness by amending HUD's definition so that children and youth identified by one of the 8 federal programs, including the Department of Education and McKinney-Vento liaisons, would be eligible for HUD homeless assistance. Now, McKinney-Vento only focuses on the children that are in from preschool to 12th grade. Once they graduate, McKinney-Vento, I don't want to say it disappears, but they're not eligible once they graduate to 12th grade.
Right. So they don't have the same kind of support that
yes. So they don't have the same kind that HUD has. Improved data collection on homelessness. Right now, the only thing that McKinney-Vento does, we have to put them in the computer system, and that's it. That's how we track them.
Yeah. So I will add, we do have a bill that's been introduced, HR 5221, the Homeless Children and Youth Act. It currently has 15 co-sponsors, and we are encouraging everyone to reach out to their U.S. rep and their U.S. senator and ask for their support and their consideration of co-sponsorship as well. Courtney talked about HESHP, which is, I know, a mouthful, but we use that acronym just to kind of sum up what we're trying to advocate for there. HESP was introduced as a bill, HR 6666, in the last session. So we are currently trying to get our Congress folks to reintroduce that bill. There is considerable support for it, and we expect a reintroduction to come at some point in coming months, but we will still need as many folks to sign on to support it as possible. And I will also add that both these pieces of legislation, as well as our ask of additional and flexible funding, have bipartisan support. So these aren't partisan issues. Folks on both sides of the aisle and our independents, we'll talk about briefly in our next slide, understand the importance of providing greater support for our youth experiencing homelessness. I do see a question. Barbara asked, can you please explain what the McKinney-Vento programming can do to help foster children? It's my understanding that McKinney-Vento only applies after graduation for foster children. Can you address that, Renata?
Okay. Back in 2019, we were no longer able to help foster kids while they're in public schools, like preschool to 12th grade. It only applies to them after they graduate for the foster students.
Thank you. And that is it for now, but we are going to pause briefly in a moment to take additional questions, and feel free to continue dropping them in the Q&A box as well. So do you want me to take this one?
Yes.
All right. So I talked about the advocacy that our fellows have been involved in. And one of the reasons we're doing this webinar is to educate you all about the things that are impacting youth homelessness in Alabama, and encourage you to help us in the advocacy work that we need to do. And that's around those 3 priorities. December and January is a great time to get involved in this advocacy, because you'll have an opportunity to connect with Congress members while they're in district. We include this information just to re-emphasize the importance of bipartisan support for the legislation that we're advocating for. And as you can see here, both the House and the Senate are really closely divided. So it's critical that we get support from both sides of the aisle. We've had both Democrats and Republicans sign on to HR 5221, which is evident of that bipartisan support, but we want to continue to hammer home the fact that this isn't a partisan issue. This is about doing all we can to help young people who are the most vulnerable in our community.
So we have met with Katie Britt's, Senator Katie Britt's team. We spoke with John DeGaris, and so we were just trying to familiarize him with like some of the things that we've seen with our agencies and why we would like them to support some of the priorities that we mentioned to you all. We would like for you all to also ask the senators and U.S. representatives to support robust, flexible funding for students experiencing homelessness, support reform to higher education for homelessness and foster youth through the reintroduction of HESH, and support the passage of Homeless Children and Youth Act, which is those aligning of the definitions so that those families that are going in between what HUD defines as literal homelessness and unstably housed are able to access more homeless services. And so with our meeting with John, we did share some of the statistics that we had, and he was, meeting with Katie to discuss further support for these things. They seem to be very supportive of the things that we discussed, because part of Katie's, what she ran on was the making the invisible visible. And so a lot of that would be supporting those homeless families who often do go under the radar because their homelessness isn't on the street panhandling. Oftentimes with those with families, it's when they are instably housed and homeless in that way, they often are overlooked for services because people are looking for it to look a certain way. And it's a lot of families that go through that, and there's a lot of stigma with that. So we want to be people, when they can access services, to have something to access. So this is where what we're advocating for, and what we encourage others to advocate for, and to research and look more into it and see how that your agencies or the people you're involved with can also be supporting some of the priorities that we have as well.
Thank you for that, Courtney. And I'll just point out that's one of the reasons we spend so much time talking about the different ways that homelessness manifests itself, so people understand the many faces of youth homelessness, because a lot of times our elected officials just don't know. And I'm also grateful that you talked a little bit about the response you got, Courtney. And I wanted to give you and Renata a chance to kind of elaborate on takeaways you all have from your visits, anything that surprised you or anything that encouraged you.
So I was very nervous, honestly, because I didn't know what to expect. I've never talked to any senator or representative or their team at all. So it was a very relaxed session. John asked lots of questions. He was himself is very interested in homelessness, and they're very interested in focusing on families. And so it was very easy to kind of suggest and make correlations between their platform and our causes. So I think that it helped. And so we are waiting to hear a response. Hopefully we
Yes.
we hear something soon about the support. I think it looks promising. So
I was a little nervous as well. However, when he started talking, the nervousness subsided. So I'm anxious to know where it's going to go from here.
Thank you. And to answer your question, Barbara, I don't believe we have a co-sponsor from Alabama, but I'll have to double check. There are 15 folks who have signed on so far from various states around the country. We have a great resource available to us to track the legislation as well as see who has signed on a co-sponsor and to look up the legislation that's been introduced previously. That's congress.gov. Just go in and type the bill number 5221, or if you want to look at the history bill that was introduced in the prior session, that was HR 6666. You just look under 2022, and you can get more information about that bill. You can also type in the name of your Congress member to see whether or not he or she has signed on to it. You can also get more information about the work that we're doing at the federal level by signing up for Schoolhouse Connections newsletter or visiting the federal policy page on our website. And if you want more information about what our policy fellows are doing, or you have questions that you may think of later, feel free to reach out to myself or reach out to Courtney. She's provided her email address here too. And if you have something for Renata, you want to send either of us, we will make sure that she gets that as well. If you are interested in being involved in advocacy, similar to what Renata and Courtney have done in collaboration with Schoolhouse, I encourage you to scan this QR code, which will connect you to our advocacy network, through which we can help you get trained like these two women have and become an effective advocate. We help you understand how to set up virtual meetings, how to prep for those meetings so that you can engage your Congress members and their staff members. We equip you with information, not only to educate yourself, but to share with Congress members that you might meet with, one-pagers and talking points, and anything else that you might need to help you engage in that advocacy. So we're hoping you may step up and take advantage of this great time frame we have in December and January to make some of those connections. And I want to thank you once again for joining us. I'll give you a couple seconds to let us know if you have additional questions. And if not, we'll let you go enjoy the rest of your day. Courtney or Renata, did you want to say anything before we sign off?
No, sir. Just, I'm glad that they came on.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. And if you all have any questions about One Roof or what we do and how we're, working to integrate some of the things I've learned from Schoolhouse Connection, you can just email me on the slide with the email.
All right. Thank you once again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.